under the command of. Most of what we think we know about the birth of cities comes from a single corridor. Tigris. Euphrates Valley gave us the template grain surplus, specialization of labor, a temple at the center, a palace near the temple, streets to move goods between them, hierarchy to organize everyone, and eventually writing to track who owns what. That model gets applied everywhere. To Jericho, to early Chinese settlements, to the Indus Valley sites. It is also, at least partly, a story about one region exported as a universal law. Çatalhöyük, settled around 700 and 500 BCE on the Konya Plain in what is now central Turkey, challenges that law directly. Several thousand people living in packed mud, brick houses, for close to 2,000 years, with no streets, no discernible temples, and no identifiable elite quarter. Pull on that thread. Before we look at what a Çatalhöyük actually shows, it is worth being fair to the model it is challenging. Good of. The standard account of urban origins holds that cities emerged from a set of linked preconditions. The agricultural surplus that freed a portion of the population from food production, which enabled specialization, which required coordination, which required hierarchy, which required a central authority, which left physically visible traces in the archaeological record. Monumental architecture for the gods or the rulers. Differential burial goods showing who had more. Streets and plazas serving as arteries for trade. Evidence of long, distance exchange networks under elite control. This model was built on solid data. Mesopotamian sites give us exactly these features: differential burial wealth, distinct craft workshops, administrative buildings, a visible stratification of space. The model is not a fantasy. It is an accurate description of what those sites show, under the command of. The question is whether it describes a universal developmental path, or just describes one particular region at one particular moment. That is the question our Çatalhöyük presses. The site on the Konya Plain is a tell, an artificial mound built up over centuries of successive mud, brick construction. What excavations beginning in the 1960s revealed inside it was, by any standard, extraordinary. Houses built directly against each other, with no space between them. No streets, no alleys, no lanes. The only way in or out was through a hole in the flat roof, reached by a wooden ladder. You climbed down into your home. Your neighbor's roof was your courtyard, your commute, your shared outdoor space. This is not a failed attempt at streets. The roof. Level circulation is consistent across the site and sustained across layer after layer of rebuilding. It was the design. Inside the houses, the dead were buried under the floor, often directly beneath the sleeping platform. Command of. Human bones have been documented as removed and re-interred, sometimes moved between households, suggesting the bones of ancestors were actively managed as objects with ongoing social meaning. Plastered cattle skulls, bucrania, protruded from interior walls. Painted panels, covered surfaces, geometric patterns, hunting scenes with figures pursuing aurochs and deer, and in a small number of documented cases, images that appear to show large birds near headless human forms. Among the earliest narrative painting so far found anywhere, obsidian was present in quantity. Volcanic glass ideal for cutting tools. It came from geological sources in what is now eastern Anatolia, well over 100 kilometers from the site, worked by people who clearly understood the material. The site's early excavations in the 1960s produced dramatic claims. Gun Brig under the command of. The archaeologist who led that work interpreted the site as a center of an elaborate goddess cult, pointing to a large number of figurines, many depicting seated or rounded female forms, as evidence of a prehistoric matriarchal religion. These claims received wide coverage and became a fixture in popular writing about prehistoric spirituality. The problem is that part of the original excavation record was later found to contain fabricated or embellished documentation for specific artifacts and their find spots. The basic stratigraphy, the layers, the house layouts, the burial evidence survived scrutiny. Some of the interpretive claims, built on specific artifact placements, did not. The 1990s. A large international excavation project began systematic work at the site under rigorous modern documentation standards. What decades of that work added changed the picture significantly. Main. Stable isotope analysis of human remains, which traces diet through the chemistry preserved in bone, showed a notably uniform distribution across individuals excavated from the site. The kind of divergence in bone chemistry that elsewhere signals elite food access versus common food access is largely absent here. Brig under the command of. This is not conclusive evidence of social equality. Status can be expressed through channels that leave no dietary trace. Command of. But it is not what you would expect from a site with a Mesopotamia-style hierarchy. The figurines, once read as goddess images, turned out, under the later excavations' contextual documentation, to come overwhelmingly from trash deposits. Middens. They were not being placed in shrines. The cult reading was significantly overstated. Part of the persistence of the textbook frame is that we have no better category for Çatalhöyük. Is too large and too densely occupied to be a village in any conventional sense. Archaeological survey of the surrounding landscape has documented a regional network of smaller sites, with the Tell as the largest concentration, under the command of. Something drew and held people there in numbers that the smaller Neolithic settlements in the region did not sustain. The word city does work here even if it fits badly. Part of it is also the power of superlatives. One of the earliest large settlements in the world makes a usable headline. Complicated functional categories do not. The earliest media coverage of the site, and some of the first excavation reporting leaned into superlative framings. Earliest city, prehistoric goddess cult. First urban experiment, because those framings are comprehensible to a general audience. They also tend to be overstated, but corrections rarely travel as far as the original claim. The deeper problem is that archaeological method was partly designed to detect hierarchy. The field looks for differential burial goods, monumental architecture, administrative records, versus non-elite residential zones. When a site does not produce those signals, the method is not well equipped to describe what it is actually seeing. Çatalhöyük may represent a failure of detection instruments as much as it represents a genuine exception. That uncertainty is worth holding on to. The honest accounting of what we do not know. We do not know why the site was abandoned. Around 5700 BCE, occupation on the main mound drops off substantially. There is continued occupation nearby for a period under the command of, but the concentrated density that defined the site across nearly 2,000 years does not persist. Climate shifts, resource exhaustion, social reorganization, dispersal into the broader landscape, all have been proposed under the command of. The evidence does not adjudicate between them. We do not know what the painted panels meant to the people who made them. The hunting scenes are repeated across many houses. The images that appear to show large birds near human remains are striking. Whether they had ritual function, commemorated specific events, marked lineage, or served some purpose with no modern analog, we cannot say from the images alone. Attempts to read specific religious meaning into them, sky burial traditions, specific deity forms, ancestor veneration, are interpretation, not documentation. Under the command of. We do not know what language the inhabitants spoke, what they called themselves, or what name, if any, they had for the settlement. The site name is modern Turkish, meaning roughly fork mound. Nothing from the site is written. We do not know whether the egalitarian material signal reflects genuine social flatness or hierarchy expressed through channels the excavation cannot detect. Prestige, oral authority, ritual knowledge, rights to certain objects or spaces. The absence of elite markers is informative. It is not the same as proof of equality. Here is what the evidence, handled carefully, supports. Çatalhöyük was a large, dense, long-lived settlement that operated for close to 2,000 years without the physical infrastructure we associate with urban hierarchy. No streets, no identifiable palaces, no clearly administrative buildings, no discernible stratification in the dietary record, under the command of whatever coordination held thousands of people together in that space across that time. It did not leave the same footprint that coordination left in Mesopotamia. This is consistent with two readings. The first, the site had hierarchy that the available evidence cannot detect, expressed through kinship, ritual authority, oral tradition, or material goods that have not survived, organic prestige objects, access to certain ceremonies, the right to speak, for a lineage. None of these would leave an unambiguous trace in mud, brick, and bone. The second reading, under the command of. The people of Çatalhöyük worked out how to sustain a dense settlement without a centralized authority, for close to 2,000 years. If that reading is correct, it matters. Under the command of. Because our standard model treats hierarchy as a necessary solution to the coordination problem that large settlements create. Çatalhöyük does not confirm that necessity. The roof, level layout, is worth sitting with on its own terms. In a settlement without streets, the shared outdoor space is above. Social life happened on the roof, not between the houses, but on top of them. That inversion, up rather than across, under the command of, is a genuinely different answer to the question of how several thousand people share space. It worked for a very long time before it stopped. The command of. Our model of what early cities look like was built from Mesopotamian evidence, and it describes that evidence accurately. Çatalhöyük is a reminder that Mesopotamia was one solution to a problem humans in several places were working on at roughly the same time. This settlement existed for close to 2,000 years and left no administrative records, no identifiable rulers, no streets. What it left was dense physical evidence of how people actually lived. What we don't know is still larger than what we do. What survives is often what was useful to power. This site survived because it was a mound. Until next time.